Okay, guys, I want to welcome everybody. It's another Tuesday morning for Nomberg Law Live, as we try to every Tuesday at 10 o'clock Central, 8 a.m. Pacific. Interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And holy smokes, we have got a doozy for you today. My good buddy, Brian Kurlander from Atlanta, who's visiting down in South Alabama. Good morning, Brian. It's so good to see you, bud.
Good morning, Bernard. How are you?
I am doing quite well, quite well. And guys, you may recognize his face. He has been on the stage and on the screen for many years. If you've recently watched Cobra Kai, you would have caught him, I think, in episode 4, maybe. And if you'd have watched House of Cards, you'd have seen him in a couple of different episodes. But Brian is a veteran on the stage, in front of the camera, behind the camera, and he just does it all. But there's so much more to that. But I can't even, I would be doing the introduction for the entire show if we did that. And that's just my way of saying, welcome, Brian. I'm so glad you've got a little bit of time today for us to have a little chat.
Oh, thanks, Bernard. Well, I'm glad to be here.
Good, good. Well, we there's so many different areas for us to talk about, but I want to just dive in and let's just talk about how during the pandemic, are actors, actresses, stage, film, how does that in general getting accomplished these days? Because you seem to never stop working. Just I know that's a big thing to bite off there, but just take a little bite and let's go.
Well, I will say that I do the bulk of my work on the stage, and I've been very fortunate. Atlanta has an extraordinary professional theater landscape. And so I get to spend a lot of my time on stages all across Atlanta. And I was in a production of Indecent. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of theater that was on Broadway a couple of years ago. And the rights have recently been released nationally. And so a number of theaters around the country were producing the show. And I was in an exquisite production of it. And literally in the middle of the run, I got a call because I was the professional deputy who takes care of the cast during the run of the show. And the producers and I had a conversation, and we had to close down the show because of COVID concerns. The cast was concerned. We were concerned for audience members. And there was nothing. It was every actor that I know, every stage manager I know, every sound designer, every lighting designer, every set designer, all of the people that go into making any kind of theatrical production around the country and to this day are not working in live theater. And I don't think we'll be working in live theater in any meaningful way until 2022. I mean, Broadway says it's going to open in 2021. I hope that's the case. I think that there may be the possibility of getting people socially distanced into a theater, but I don't think you're going to have any. I think the trust factor and the comfort factor won't be there until 2022 at the earliest. So it was very, very difficult, but quickly, very early on in the process, people started to figure out, okay, we can get on platforms like this, like Zoom, and have a conversation. And then we can get multiple people to read scripts on Zoom. So the bulk of what we're seeing right now is really innovative productions happening on platforms like this. The dark side of that is that as a professional in film and television and in theater, I'm a member of the two unions. One is called SAG-AFTRA and one is called Actors Equity Association. So this is where like labor lawyers can get in and have a field day with this, because the two unions are at odds with each other, because theaters want to be able to stream live productions. So they can, and I know some people who've done one-person shows. They get into the studios, they do a 3-camera shoot, and then they can, in a kind of closed loop, at least present the theater that people bought tickets for in advance and see these productions. However, the film and television unions are saying, whoa, you're now in our territory. And that's against the rules. Then you have to be under our contract, not under the theater contract. So at the end of the day, I think it's the performers, stage managers, and designers that get hurt because they're not able to do their work, because the unions that are there to support the performers and other folks there are not jihawing in this particularly uncertain time.
I don't know a percentage or numbers you can share this if you know, but for every one or two on-stage performers you see, how many dozens of individuals are behind the stage or behind the screen creating everything else that needs to go into place for them to do their job?
Well, in film and television, it's an army of people. For every one person that you see on camera, there are 10, 15, 20 people.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary. I love walking on a set because you're walking into a community. I mean, a large community when you go onto the set of a television show or a film.
Yeah.
And
Brian, I can see a scenario for maybe on-stage production like plays, which you so love to do, and I've seen you perform in Atlanta. I can see where you can socially distance the crowd. I can understand that part. But maybe one of the difficulties is, how do you socially distance actors and actresses who have to interact with each other on the stage in such close proximity? I don't know. Maybe they take a page out of the playbook, so to speak, of what professional hockey, professional basketball has done. How do you create a bubble like that? But I'm sure that's all part of the issues that they're having to deal with.
It's the industry itself is so transient. Like, you can create your own, if you have a long-term run of a theater show, you might be able to create some kind of a bubble with your group. That would take the 10 to 12 day period of quarantining everybody prior to production, and then making sure that nobody is interacting with anybody else. And that it's just, unfortunately, we can't all go to Disney World and live there for several months. I mean, it would be nice though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, Brian, let's shift away from the theater and on screen. I want to go back a little bit because I know so much about your background and your history, and you've got such a Renaissance man, in my opinion. But taking it way back, and for those of you who don't know, Brian was an All-America wrestler in college. Now, how did that start? Where did that come from?
Oh my gosh, when I was very young, I had a teacher who was the high school wrestling coach, and he was a big influence in my life. And he took me under his wing, and I began working out with the high school wrestling team when I was in, I think, 5th and 6th grade. And I left that school district for a couple of years, but on my breaks would come back and work out with the team in winter breaks. And I knew nothing. I wasn't very good, but I would go in there and I would let these high school kids just beat me up. So when I got to high school, I was going to dive, actually, because over the years that I was away from that school district, I started practicing diving on my own and really enjoyed that sport. And
wait, I have to pause you. I know you grew up in New York. I know wrestling is huge up there, but diving?
Oh yeah,
dive programs in New York.
Yeah, I know. I would go to the JCC and just spend hours on the 3-meter board, just doing stuff off the board.
Presumably, I assume all of this indoor.
All indoor. Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
freezing cold in Rochester, New York. It's the frozen tundra of the north. So I came back, and I was back in the school district my freshman year of high school, and the high school wrestling coach, the guy that meant so much to me, was the freshman football coach. And so he pulled me aside during practice one day, and he said, I hear you're going to dive. And I said, well, I'm thinking about it. He said, you want to play football? I said, yes, sir. He said, then you're wrestling. I said, yes, sir.
funny how coaches have that influence. But
That was pretty good.
also at this time, had you started in theater at all?
I did a play, like one play, and really enjoyed it when I was really young, like seventh, eighth grade.
Right.
But in high school, the only thing I did was a talent show. It really wasn't until it was the kind of towards the end of my college eligibility as an athlete that I had the courage. Like I could go up against some, meathead from Iowa in a wrestling match, but going out on stage and singing a song or dancing or what, it was terrifying. I was like, that you got to be kidding me. I'm never doing that.
Well, I was going to ask you this. We're talking left and right brain. They're starting to collide. It's being an athlete, particularly on the sports that you did and excelled, and then shifting so differently in a completely different endeavor, which I would think is a different part of your brain. How did that mesh together? Because I know you've got to have a certain mindset as a wrestler that I'm assuming is vastly different than a mindset of being on stage.
Yeah, well, I was watching David Letterman. I was in college and sitting in the lounge of our dorm. And Kirk Douglas was the guest that night. And Kirk Douglas was a national champion collegiate wrestler. He was a circus performer. He's all these great things. And he said, anybody who was a great wrestler could be a good actor. And I went, because I had this desire to do it. I just didn't have the courage. And hearing Kirk Douglas say that, it inspired me to go and try out for my first play. And subsequently, since then, I've actually given talks on the parallels between athletics and the arts. I think that there's a lot of dovetailing with the kinds of physical discipline that's required, the mental discipline that's required, the emotional discipline that's required. There are a lot of things that actually work nicely together. And wrestling in particular, as it is an individual sport, but you've got to be certainly in the moment. And you hear that a lot in acting, this term "in the moment." But as an athlete, you have to be in the moment. If you're a shortstop and there's a line drive coming at you at 90 miles an hour off a bat, you got to be able to react instantaneously in the moment to where that ball is going. If you anticipate the wrong way, you're never going to get the ball. But if you're in the moment and you see where it comes off the bat, you see the trajectory of the ball, you can respond in that split second because you've had that experience after years and years and years of training. And acting is the same thing. It's about being present in the moment with whatever's happening in front of you and not ignoring the actual life that's occurring around you. So if something goes wrong, you've got to be ready to respond to what's going wrong. And in that moment, you'll make it right.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I would love to have heard your talk on that, but thank you. And I want to welcome a few folks. Guys, I'm talking with longtime buddy of mine, Brian Kurlander out of Atlanta, thespian, wrestler, and we're going to get into his ROTC and marketing days as well. But I want to welcome my buddy Mitch Jackson in Southern California, my other friend Saul Gruber in Miami. Thank you guys for your comments and sharing a few minutes with Brian and me. And Brian, along the way, you go from high school, you go to college, and you're wrestling in college, but there's also an ROTC component in there. So I want you to, how did that mix into your plan?
Well, a number of my friends were military in college going through ROTC, and I was training for the Olympics at the time. I had competed in the World Championships, and so I was trying to think of the best way to go about funding my training and getting the best resources available. I was working with a club out of Albany, New York, that had put a number of guys on the Olympic team, gold medalists, Jeff Blatnick, Andy Saris, Frank Famiano, these great Greco-Roman wrestlers. And I decided that the military was a great place for me because of the structure and the dynamics that I had seen my friends going through. So I went through ROTC basic at Fort Knox, and it was incredible. It was an amazing experience and transformed how I looked from that point on forward at the military. And I always felt like I would want every college student to have the opportunity to have military training, to go through that kind of experience, because it gives you insights into things that are very, very important.
Tell me this, Brian. I've always heard that wrestling is as much mental as it is physical. I'm assuming that someone who is in the arts and being on screen and on stage, obviously there's a lot of mental that takes place there. When you're going through ROTC training, it's clear that there is as much physical in that what you're doing as anything. But I've also read and heard from many people that it really trains your mind as well. And here's my question is, did you rely on any of your prior training in the arts or in wrestling to get you through the mental aspects of the ROTC obligations? How did that work for you?
The being an athlete was really helpful because in terms of the physical dynamics of getting up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning to do PT, or bivouacking through miles of Kentucky woods, I was okay. I was a guy who's comfortable in his own body, was not going to be overwhelmed by any physical demand, whether and particularly at that point where you're in the heat, people are dropping from heat stroke because they don't know how to hydrate. I already knew all of that stuff because as a wrestler, you spend a lot of time in plastic suits trying to lose water weight. So yeah, all of those things it was very helpful. And I actually didn't even think about it. It just came very natural to me. That's why I think I really wanted to have the military experience, because the structure of being an athlete, having to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go out on, runs, particularly in New York State, where, you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning in the dead of winter, the likelihood of you walking out into a blizzard is high. And I would go out there, I would put ski goggles on, big gloves, wow. I'd have sneakers, but I'd have a snowsuit on, and I would go jog, 6 or 7 miles, before school.
What about the humidity? Did it take a while to adjust to the humidity for you?
Oh, it was, I got off the bus and into the Kentucky air, and it was like I got blasted back onto the bus again. I'd never experienced heat like that. I have since lived in the, as my wife would attest to, the real South, because she didn't really take Virginia as like the South, but just South. And so I've gotten accustomed to the humidity.
I was going to say, all your years in Alabama and now in Georgia, you should be used to it by now.
Yeah, exactly. But Rochester actually is, oddly enough, it is not a dry climate. It is a incredibly wet climate. You hear about these ice storms and overcast skies and a lot of rain. Rochester is the Seattle of the East Coast.
Huh. Interesting. I want to stick with the ROTC training for just a minute.
Sure.
It's you're such a creative guy, and it's clear in the work that you've done over the last 25 years, whether it's in marketing, in Birmingham or in the arts, which you've done for years. The military doesn't necessarily want to cultivate the creativity in people. They want you to do things their way and do it the right way, which is their way. Was there ever a struggle for you with the creativeness that you have, that you had to kind of suppress that, at least during your training time?
The fun part for me was when we would go on, when we do PT or go on marches, I always led the Jody calls. So we'd be like,
For those who don't know, what's that?
A Jody call is like all of those military songs that you hear, Airborne Ranger, and you'd sing these songs, and it just keeps you like kind of running to a particular beat. So everybody's moving in sync with each other down the road. Nobody's running too fast, nobody's running too slow. So these Jody calls are there to keep a rhythm and a beat that everybody can keep to. But I could just make up songs.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd be like, Kurlander, get out there, let's go, lead it up. And I would go out, and that's how I could use my creativity. And the company commander and the first sergeant who were in charge of our company and squad they'd take me aside, and the creativity that I had, they actually would put me into leadership positions so that I would be over the entire battalion for a stretch of time to see, how you could coordinate. But that did require not only the creativity to get people inspired to do the work, but also, the organization skills to manage, a couple hundred guys.
Well, so they recognized something in you from that. That's interesting. And it did allow you at least to explore a little bit of creativity, albeit in a different situation.
Exactly. We had fun.
Where you wouldn't see that. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, you decided that the military was not going to be your career. And was the theater, I guess, at what point did you, because let me back up. It's everybody at some point in their mind as a kid or later on aspires to do something in the arts. I want to be on the big screen, or I want to be on the TV, whatever it is. But 99.99% or even higher than that, they don't go very far with it. No. But at some point, it stuck with you. You figured out your niche, and you've made such great choices along the way. I guess my question for you, and this would be if I'm an aspiring thespian and I want some advice from a veteran, is at what point did it click for you that, hey, I not only can I do this, but I can make this as a profession for myself?
I believed in myself. That was the most important thing. And I had that confidence coming off of being an athlete. And I didn't there was no space in between me retiring as an athlete and becoming an actor. I literally went directly into acting. We were in the locker room after a practice one day, and somebody in the locker room said that there was an improvisational group on campus auditioning, and we should go there because we were in the locker room. We always did stuff in the locker room, with each other, and made up characters and did all these different things, and had the funniest guys I ever knew, and to this day the funniest guys I know are my ex-teammates from this extraordinary wrestling team at James Madison back in the mid 80s. So we went to this improv audition, a bunch of us, and I ended up getting cast in this company of our group of guys, because the guys got there, and what they would normally do in the locker room, they couldn't do in front of strangers. And I didn't have any qualms about that. I guess I had no shame. So I ended up doing that. So I was doing improv while I was finishing out my eligibility as an actor. And then people saw me doing these improv shows and asked me to be in their productions. So my last year of college, which was a fifth year of college, all I did was main stage and other theater projects. So I ended up doing, I think, 12 different plays.
Wow.
My last year of college. And then actually in between that, studied in New York, and then was going back to Manhattan, and went right into, acting classes in New York City, and working off Broadway, and going out to Los Angeles and all that stuff. So I just kind of went.
It for those who don't know, Brian, it's so beautifully explaining that it is a long, difficult process of studying and educating yourself and getting your name and your face out there, and just I'm sure a lot of failures to go along with a lot of successes. And one of the questions that was asked of me to ask you
Okay.
is, how does a person, and maybe just taking from your story, how do you go from doing local theater to make it into House of Cards on Netflix or Cobra Kai on Netflix?
Yeah, it's training. It's all about training. And it's about relationships. It's like any industry. I've been in Atlanta now for 11 years. And when I got to Atlanta, I was very fortunate. My first audition, I booked a job with a great theater company, and was able to build community pretty quickly there. But even then, I would go long stretches without working in the very beginning of getting to know the community, and the community getting to know me. So it's, after 11 years now, I can say, well, I can, I've got the relationships to work in a number of places, whether it be on television and film or stage. But I went to graduate school for 3 years to get a master's degree in classical theater, because coming from a wrestling background, which I always looked at as a classical kind of sport, a foundational sport that gave you the physical and mental strength to do the things that you needed to do to succeed, I looked at the classics like Shakespeare and the modern playwrights like Ibsen and Shaw and Chekhov as foundational material to build a career that I could sustain. With that kind of understanding.
How many other people have you seen with an IMDb page that also mentions that they are in their college's sports hall of fame? I don't think I've seen any other. For what I'm referring to, is Brian was honored a few years ago into the James Madison Sports Hall of Fame for his wrestling career, which was so deserved and big honor. But
I'm there with Lefty Driesell, that great basketball coach.
That's right.
And
that's right.
Charles Haley, 5-time Super Bowl champ.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's a pretty good company right there.
Good company, to be honest with you.
Well, Brian, tell us, share with folks the name of your theater in Atlanta and what I don't know if you guys currently have anything on the books for next year yet, or how can people get involved or be part of the
I work, there are a number of great professional theaters in Atlanta that I work with. I've worked with a theatrical outfit a great deal that was run by Birmingham native Tom Key. People may know him. He wrote Cotton Patch Gospel with Harry Chapin and a number of other plays that he's written, but he ran theatrical outfit for the past 25 years. He recently retired, and a guy named Matt Turney from Washington has come in and taken over, and he's really an amazing artistic director. He's going to take theatrical outfit to the next chapter of its life. But it's one of the oldest professional theater companies in Atlanta. Right after I get off with you, I go into rehearsal with them on this same platform for a show. Sunday night, I was doing a show with a theater company. We did Three Sisters on this platform. The night before, we did Much Ado About Nothing on this platform.
And when you say on this platform, you're presenting via Zoom to an audience.
Zoom, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And creating, physical backdrops, and like I would move the camera with so the audience gets the dynamic of movement, and we're doing all these technical things to create something that's a little more dynamic than just this two-dimensional kind of thing.
And our audience is getting used to this a little bit?
We had several hundred people in attendance, so that's really amazing. Like, to get that many people on the platform is pretty great. And I've done a number of these now with various theater companies in Atlanta. So,
for folks who don't know, Atlanta has a thriving theater district, and it's just I'm always amazed at what Atlanta has to offer. But let's take it even to a smaller town, my hometown, your wife Carrie, who's my childhood friend's hometown, Dothan, which is not a small town by any stretch, but it's under 100,000 people.
Mhm.
But it's had a long-standing theater company and very active theater community. And so here's my question, Brian. Regardless of what size city or community you grow up, if you have a desire or a passion to be involved in the arts, can't you find it just about anywhere?
Anywhere. It really, the people that I admire the most as artists are spread out in towns like Dothan, all over the United States. I happen to marry into a family where the arts is a really important element of their life. My wife Carrie's father was an extraordinary musician. My beautiful mother-in-law, who turned 80 yesterday, and why we're down here celebrating, is one of the keystones of the art community in Dothan. And when my mother-in-law came to Dothan with Huntley Johnson back in the 60s, she began to build with other like-minded people an arts community that is really exceptional. And you could take Dothan, Alabama, and you could put it anywhere in the country, and this arts community is going to be exceptional. So it just comes down to the passions of individuals and like-minded people getting together to produce work that speaks to the community.
And even if you're a 10-year-old child or a 50-year-old grown man, if you want to find it, I'm sure in your community you can. My grandparents in Jacksonville, Florida, were in community theater for 40 years.
Yeah.
And they loved being in those local plays, and their friends came and saw them. Yeah. And they loved that part of their life. So I think you can find it just about anywhere.
That self-expression, that ability to create community. The theater started in ancient Greece as it created the liturgies that you see in churches and temples and mosques all over the world. That this coming together to experience something as a community is such an important part of our culture. And right now, during a pandemic where we are all spread apart, we are all trying to create community like you are, like the things that you are doing right now are bringing people together from all across the country to have a communal experience together, to hear and to learn together. It's the same thing. Yeah. And we are getting to a point where, we've got to be able to come together as a community to have similar experiences. And we can get off into a very dark political conversation.
We may have to hold that for another day.
Exactly. But that's a fundamental part of being a human being. I mean, there are things that we need. We need food, we need shelter, but we need to tell stories, and we need to experience stories. Mm-hmm. And those stories that we experience are the threads of humanity that bind us all together.
Well, my friend, sadly, we've come toward the end of our conversation, but I hope, and I know you will, continue to tell your stories and share your craft with so many. I love what you're doing, and I hope to join you in person sometime soon for the next one of your on-stage performances. So thank you, Brian, for spending some time with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Bernard. This was fantastic.
Oh, this was so much fun. I always love these conversations. And guys, as I do and as I have now for over 3 years, we've done about 175 of these or so, and we're going to keep on going every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. I know it's an inconvenient time for most, but you can catch us on the replay. I put this on YouTube, but it's interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And you see now how it was hard to narrow it down with Brian and all of his interesting parts of his world. So thank you again. You guys be safe. We'll catch you again on Nomberg Law Live next Tuesday. Be well.
Take care.